Hey folks, the Comics Kid 2099 here. Like every Saturday, I'm here to talk about an episode of a superhero animated series, and today I will be talking about an episode of Batman Beyond Season 2 titled Hooked Up. If you don't like spoilers, leave now because I will be spoiling, and if you don't care about the spoilers, then stick around. And before I get to the review itself, I'll quickly be recapping the episode just in case you forgot what happened in the episode. This episode opens with yet another classmate of Terry's who is introduced in this episode and is never seen again afterwards, Donnie. He's hooked, hence the name of the episode, on a really intense virtual reality simulation being run by the villain Spellbinder, who we haven't seen since the Season 1 episode Spellbound. Spellbinder has a few kids all hooked up on this stuff, which Bruce tells Terry is dangerous because it increases serotonin levels in the brain, leaving all the victims in a coma. Spellbinder allows his victims to keep using the VR simulations if they steal money for him. Terry's friend Max wants to be more involved in the Batmaning, and when Terry resolutely refuses, she winds up getting hooked on the VR stuff herself, but isn't so far gone to allow Spellbinder to kill Batman when Batman tries to save her. She does indeed save Batman, and Spellbinder is once again put away. Cue credits. A few times in Batman the Animated Series, I've talked about how once you've introduced a villain with a certain shtick, when you reuse that villain later on, their shtick is usually changed a little bit so that audiences don't get bored with the same thing that they saw in the previous episode using that character. Take Scarecrow, for instance. In his debut episode, Nothing to Fear, he's basically the Scarecrow of the comics. He uses fear toxin to increase and introduce fear in his victims, while he can steal and essentially do whatever he wants. Then when we next see him in Fear of Victory, he's still using the fear toxin, but is now using it against certain athletes and betting against them when he fixes the games that they're involved in. You see the same thing happen with other characters like Poison Ivy and the Mad Hatter. This sort of thing doesn't happen quite as often in Batman Beyond because this series doesn't have nearly as much of a recurring rogues gallery as Batman the Animated Series. Season 1 had Derek Powers, who was a season-long villain, and therefore his shtick wasn't changing from episode to episode. I would almost say that this is really the first time that this has happened in this series. It kinda sorta happened with Tin of the Royal Flush Gang, who started off as a full-on criminal, albeit a reluctant criminal. And then when we see her again, she was still committing criminal acts, but she was only doing that to save her family. Still, I would say this is more clearly an example of the villain being introduced with a specific gimmick or shtick, and then when we see them again, they're still sorta using that gimmick or shtick, but in a different enough way that it feels fresh and exciting for anyone who might have seen the villain in their previous appearance. And I don't really have a problem with this series and Batman the Animated Series doing this because, like I said, it keeps things fresh and interesting. If you've seen Nothing to Fear and Scarecrow does X, Y, and Z in that episode, and then you're watching Fear of Victory, you don't really want to see him doing exactly the same thing in that episode, because you've already seen Batman triumph over him when he did that. The only thing I really don't like about it is that sometimes it feels like too much of a stretch. We have this character who we like and we want to use again, but we're running out of creative ways to spin their gimmick so that people aren't bored with this character. Fortunately, in this episode, since this is only the second time that we've seen Spellbinder, they aren't really in danger of that just yet. In this case, someone who is able to induce hallucinations on a one-on-one basis to force one person at a time to steal valuable items for him, well, it makes a lot of sense that after he's stopped, he might try to expand his operations by inducing even more vivid hallucinations in even more people. And in the episode Spellbound, while he definitely benefited from his situation by getting valuable stuff from his victims, the victims really didn't benefit at all, and that eventually came back to bite him in the butt. When multiple people steal something and then later claim to have no memory of doing so, and they can all be traced back to one man, that is definitely a flaw in the game plan. But here, Spellbinder seems to have learned from his mistakes. Now, he gives his victims something in return, a more vivid hallucination of anything they want. And in return, he gets what he wants, money. And there's significantly less risk of him getting caught. In fact, the only reason that he does get caught is because his victims were stupid enough to mention him by name in front of Terry, and that in return only happened because he was dumb enough to use his codename and wear his costume still. Yes, that has to happen because this is a superhero cartoon, and his costume is much more distinctive than plainclothes. But still, from a character perspective, this decision makes absolutely no sense at all. But anyway, that was a long road to a short point of Spellbinder's plan in this episode is actually a lot more pragmatic than his debut episode, which is always a good thing, to see characters, even bad guys, learn something and not remain static and boring. Now, I've talked for all this time, and I haven't even gotten to Max yet. Up until now, we haven't really gotten a whole lot about Max in this series. Since her debut episode, we've seen her behind the scenes a little, but nothing really major to dig into who she is as a character. Even the episode that introduces her really just gives us some of the basics. She's a friend of Dana and Terry, she's smart, and she immediately proves to be an asset to Team Batman, which is important because when Bruce Wayne is involved, you definitely need to prove that you are bringing something to the table, otherwise he's not gonna even let you be at the table. But this episode does quite a bit to round her out as a character. While she is valuable as a member of the team, she's not infallible. We see here that her desire to be more involved, even to the point of wanting to be out in the field with Terry, that is dangerous to the mission and almost gets Terry killed. We also get to see that her home life isn't ideal, though not as sad as what Donnie is going through. Now, all of this is great and would make Max feel like more of a real person instead of just a cardboard cutout like Dana, which would be good if all of this stuff stayed with her character throughout the rest of the series. But I cannot ever remember Max's somewhat sad home life ever being referenced again, or her desire to be out in the field ever really coming up again either, which essentially amounts to Max going right back to being as developed as she was in the previous episode. She's still more developed than any of Terry's other schoolmates, but unfortunately, it's still character regression. I've talked for quite a bit about this episode, but I think that's about all I have to say. I really enjoyed this episode, and any faults I did have with it really more are faults with future episodes for not continuing the character development that this episode does with Max. This really is a great episode in my humble opinion. What did you guys think of it? Like it? Hate it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you did like this episode, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you did like the episode, then next week I'll be doing a similar review on an episode of Batman the Animated Series. And the weekend after that, I'll be talking about another episode of Batman Beyond. And be sure to check what I'm doing throughout the week to see other kinds of videos. Until then, I'll see you guys next time. Have a great rest of the day.